Hi there, this is Krista Moore with The Krista Moore Show, and this show is brought to you by K Coaching and ID Growth as a new way to learn from industry experts and thought leaders. And today I have the opportunity to have my guest right in the studio, which I always love to mix it up, and I want to thank you, Dr. Julie, for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Krista.
And we met a couple of years ago. How many years? 3 years ago?
A little over 3 years ago.
Kind of by accident. We were traveling from Denver to Aspen for a conference, and we were ride sharing. And that's a beautiful ride, wonderful conference. But boy, what a great way to get to know someone when you're in a car for a couple of hours and enjoying each other's company. So we've stayed in touch. I'm very excited about your new book, and I thought it would be a great opportunity to talk about it to my audience because I could just see that it could be really almost revolutionary in terms of changing the way that people see themselves, understand themselves. And I just want to share it. Yeah, so when we always like to kind of shake things up a little bit, and this is a blend of personal and business.
That's right.
And we typically have a business audience. But first, I would like for you to tell us a little bit about yourself, give us some background, and then I want to kind of dive into this kind of mysterious topic and have some fun with it.
Great. So I was a star performer in school, and so I went to engineering school, got a scholarship. I was one of 3 women in my class at the time, got a systems engineering degree, worked for a few years, and then I went back to school, completely different area, so it seems. But now I tie them together, where before I was working with computer systems, now I'm working with human systems. And an interesting tidbit, if you don't already know, our human system is more complicated than the most sophisticated supercomputers that we have right now. So there's a never-ending
brain.
It's that brain.
Well, and when you talk about system, I'm assuming, based on some of the reading, the system is this whole thing. The mind, body, and soul kind of
That's right.
system. And today you have a practice, and you are known as Dr. Julie.
Yes.
And you do a lot of mental health, mental advice, guiding, and you work with a lot of trauma patients, right?
That's right.
What is your experience with that? I know you've had many years of kind of working with different groups in the trauma area.
So myself personally, I have been immersed in my clinical life for more than 25 years. Working with trauma, we have a postgraduate training program in trauma-informed clinical practice. I have supported the media on some of their stories where they wanted expert guidance and input on situations. I have testified in the courts with severe trauma cases, and my whole center is focused on taking it to another level. Mm-hmm. And this is where I identified with your fast track approach to everything. Like, let's get it done, let's be efficient. We are all about that, and we're using science to lead the way to faster results.
So in essence, you are a therapist.
I am a therapist, not essence. I have a license.
You absolutely are a licensed therapist, but you don't really use that word so much. I hear the word guide a lot. I mean, that just kind of seems to be more you. You're guiding your patients through some thought processes and kind of brain, body, mind experiences, stuff. And it's very complex, I will tell you. So what we're going to do is try and break it down for our audience today. Now, this is something that I found fascinating, and we've talked about this on a number of occasions. I don't know if there's a shift in business culture today where they're starting to realize that, hey, the employee is a person, not just a number, and not just a role or a title, but they're a whole system themselves. That's a whole individual. And what I like to think about is they have different parts and facets of their life, right? You might have finances, health, relationships, business, family, and they could be your 5, whatever those 5 are. But they all have to be working well together as a system in order to be balanced, to be happy, to feel healthy and fulfilled. So that's just kind of like my interpretation of this, right? And what I see, and what we advertised here, is so many people, they want to thrive. They want to be great at all of it. They want to thrive in business and love and life, but they get stuck.
Yes.
And they're not sure why they get stuck. They know they're supposed to be doing certain things or changing their behavior or adapting in some way, but they're just like in this stuck place.
Yes.
And that's where I find your research was very enlightening to, hey, there's a solution out there.
Solution.
There's an answer.
Yes.
So that's where I want to open it up for a moment, that this is a deep subject, but she has a great way of making it simple and also making it relatable. And so why don't you start with maybe a generic description of what I'm talking about?
Sure. So you're talking about implicit memory.
Yes.
And very specifically, my philosophy in working with clients, you were talking about the facilitation or being a guide, is that this system that we have is amazing. It's adaptive, it's built for survival, and the vastness of the resources that each one of us has is beyond what we can even comprehend. So when we're talking about implicit memory,
I'd love for you to define that for us. Like, what exactly does implicit memory mean?
Yes. So implicit memory is essentially your unconscious, but there are 3 different types of implicit memory. Most people think of procedural memory, the type of thing where you have
like
routine.
ride a bike.
Exactly. Riding a bike, when you first learn, you have to think about all the components, but then it goes into this other part of your brain, which is into your implicit memory. And you don't have to think about those components anymore. You and I can be bike riding, having a conversation. I don't think about shifting or braking or turning anymore. So that's one type. Priming is another. And the focus of the book is emotional affective memory. That's implicit. So,
and that, I'm thinking too, there are things in our subconscious that's just where they go and they stay there. And your practice is enabling them to come out and kind of connect the dots to any current situation or challenge or even trauma.
That's right. And sometimes trauma therapy gets a bad name because people think, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to tell these terrible stories and relive them. We're not about that at all. We're about the present day and having a person identify any type of roadblock. And so when I say the piece about the business piece, this happens all the time. You know how you can tell when implicit memory is at play? You know how to do something, you're able to do something, and you want to do something, but somehow it's not happening. A perfect example.
I like the book example where you were talking about a sales leader that was having a difficult time with accountability, which many people can relate to that. But I'd like you to take that story and explain then how you worked through this rewiring process.
Yes. So this guy was actually the owner of the company with a sales background. And he came in and his pain point was that he was not able to hold his team accountable in the way that he knew was best for them. And he knew this from his own success as a salesperson. Every time it came to have these tough conversations about how they weren't meeting their numbers and what was going to happen as a consequence, he would avoid it.
He was just a nice guy.
Yeah, but he was baffled himself because he knew logically why it was going to help his company and why it would ultimately help his team.
But there was probably something physically happening to him at that time, you know, where it just was, he was getting sick in his stomach or having some kind of stress related effect.
Well, I can tell you when he came in, he was really upset that it wasn't getting to the finish line. And he had come to me through a recommendation because it was the concept that this invisible stuff might be getting in his way.
Yeah.
And so what we did was, by using something that I talk about in the book, this PACT methodology, we made something that was invisible visible. And what that thing was that when he was growing up, his father was pretty punitive and controlling, and that he had associated authority with being a jerk. And so when he was in the position of authority and needed to have consequence and accountability with his team, his body said, ooh, that was really painful for you. I don't want you to do that now. And so then that was where the sabotage was happening. His system was using old data and resisting what he knew he needed to do and wanted to do.
But he wasn't aware that was happening because it's all on this subconscious level.
It flies below the radar. So once, and that was profound for him to be like, oh my gosh, of course, that's what's happening. that resonates with me, and I can feel that same feeling that I had growing up. And of course, I don't want to be that person.
Yeah.
He got that. But that's not where it ends.
Well, the one thing I want to interject on that is we talk about personal and business and try and keep them separate so often, as I was mentioning it at the beginning of the show. And it seems to be blending a little bit more culturally. Maybe it's the new generation is making family first and things like that in the business environment. But that's a great example of how it affected his professional life, but I'm sure it had impact on his personal life as well.
Yes.
And how he maybe was a father, or how he treated other people.
That's right. It absolutely did. And I think part of the shift in incorporating our whole self, including our mental health, with a business and professional side of our experience, is that there are studies out there. There are performance-based studies and productivity studies that actually show that when there's an investment in well-being, all of that other stuff follows.
Yeah, and you and I spoke about this, but one of the things that I've been talking a lot about and writing about is creating more of an experience where, in order to learn, you're attending like a retreat, right? Where you're focused on business, but it's a business wellness retreat. You're focused on the whole person, not just building that sales strategy or learning a new skill, but you're really having greater self-awareness to be able to make, the proper changes in your business to move on, to move forward. But what are your thoughts about?
I love that, Krista.
Like just getting out of the work environment, getting into a retreat setting, and she's been doing retreats for 20 years, so she gets retreats.
Not quite 20, 12.
Oh, 12. I knew there was a 2 in it.
But it sounded better.
Well, I'm going to yours in a couple of months, so I look forward to that.
I think it's critical. Most of the people that come on my retreat are business owners, and they get it. When you can step away from the demands and the pulls of every day, they get that that's what's necessary to kind of clear the radar and then to start to move out things that are no longer serving us. And that's what we're talking about with implicit memory, is digging in a very deep way so that, hey, today in 2019, or we're almost in 2020, that we're our best selves to accomplish and succeed in the things we want.
And what we see frequently is there's this connection between strategy and the thought behind the strategy and the passion and desire, but the actual action might be missing. And that's what comes to mind for me when we talk about this. There's something preventing you, stopping you from making that shift or making that change. And I wanted you to give us another kind of business example of that.
Yeah, there's another example that comes to mind. An executive that I was working with came to me. It was referred from a cognitive behavioral therapist. And she came to me because she had been in a plane crash on the job. She had a very high level job that required international travel, and she was in danger of losing her job. She had survived the accident, but had some physical injuries. The biggest problem she was facing is she could not go into an airport without having a full-blown panic attack. Her body would not let her get into an airport, much less on an airplane, and her job was in jeopardy.
And then so coming to you, she was able to address that or change her feelings about flying, or what exactly took place?
So this is interesting because she had already been prepped with 2 months of work with a cognitive behavioral therapist who was doing desensitization work. And so she already knew that airplane travel was statistically more safe than cars. Her body was having these physical reactions. So when I get pumped up about the topic of implicit memory, it's because we can actually get in there and change her heartbeat, her sweating, her panic, her throat closing up. We can change what's happening physiologically because we're changing the data that's telling our system. So for her, it was like, you're going to die. Well, so it was doing what was going to happen if you're going to die.
And so when you talk about brain therapy, that's what we're talking about, right?
That's
I mean, you're rewiring your thoughts, and then what impact that rewiring has on your your physical response.
And it's deeper than thoughts because they're actually neural networks of data. This is,
it could be smell, it could be
yes, so it's
sight.
the data for her. She already thought that she would be safe because she had the research to support it, but her body sensed that she was going to die.
Yeah.
Because even when she went unconscious with the plane going down, that is the data her body was taking in.
That was her memory.
So it was trying to protect her.
And that was the feeling that she had at that time. You know,
I'm going to die. She never thought that, but it was very, very stamped on her system. And we changed that quickly.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
And the proof is in the pudding, right? Because she didn't have the panic attacks.
She
didn't have the
She probably didn't have to change her position or
she
her
didn't.
job.
She saved her job, which was amazing.
Yeah, it's really cool stuff. And I hear a lot about, you know, your work with trauma and mental health. And I really respect all of that because you're hearing some really terrible experiences and stories and you're able to address that and deal with that. I don't want the audience to think that implicit memory is all bad, negative stuff. We all have it. It's in the part of our brain. It doesn't have to be bad. But it's great to be able to bring that back and understand it if there's something that's holding you back so that you can move forward.
That's right. And that's what I get excited about. So
give me an example of maybe a happy story.
There's lots of happy stories. So, you know, if you think about, and actually a lot of people want to accentuate those types of things, and we play on the experience that implicit memory can pull forward when we play a song that was reminiscent of a time and the whole physical experience comes back. And that's an example of how an implicit memory impacts us.
We talk about the 10-year-old self in our coffee discussions too, because she likes the whole concept. And
I love it.
The whole race to amazing, self-discovery, and getting on kind of a fast track to understand who you are at your core and who you are, you know, your most authentic self before peer pressure and social influence. And when we discuss that, I feel like most people will say, well, I was happy as a child, and they remember the positive things, and they remember the sights and the sounds and the songs that were played and, you know, the smells in the kitchen and things like that. But there could be something blocking them that is implicit memory. And how would you approach a client who has a struggle today that maybe goes back to when they were a child?
Yeah, so I always start in the present. There's no point in tinkering around with things that are working perfectly well. Why would you do that? So I look at their pain point, and that is actually the first part.
That's right. So there's a 4-step process or methodology that she writes about in her book, and the first one is the pain.
Yeah, and you know, it doesn't, that particular methodology, although I do this workshop for bigger corporations and things like this to help people identify what's invisible and make it more visible, it doesn't have to be done with a therapist. What you need to actually be able to see and start to get curious about what's in that hidden control panel is someone outside your consciousness.
And that term, hidden control panel, helps me as a layman here understanding the terminology a little bit, because that's where that unconsciousness lies. But the control panel visual of it being like a circuit board and everything kind of interweaving.
That's so accurate.
And what you're doing is you're trying to unravel it and then rewire it.
And then rewire it. That's right. And so with that sales guy who had the sales background, we basically took the coupling of asshole accountability, uncoupled it, let his system find more adaptive memory pockets that said accountability success, accountability growth, all this kind of stuff, and let them find that match. And it changed what was happening in his body and made it very easy to execute on what he already knew how to do. It was awesome, and he loved it. And it didn't have to take forever. It took a few hours.
Well, that's the one thing that I really like about the process, and my understanding of it is it's not, and most people have this stereotype about therapy, you know, like, I don't want to go, and I don't need a therapist, I'm fine, or I don't want to sit there and talk about, you know,
something
Aunt
hard.
Shinny's 1955 or whatever. Just bringing up all the old stuff. And that's not at all this approach. And that's what I really find fascinating is how quickly you can get from point A to point B.
Yeah.
And the way that you administer this guiding, I call it, instead of therapy, because it really feels more of a guide to me, is intensive.
It's
right?
intensive. Yes. The way that I work is intensive, and it's nonverbal.
Mm-hmm.
So that's hard a lot of times for people to get their minds around. We're not going to analyze or dissect or retell. We're using the body as a guide and using it to rewire this implicit memory. And the language of implicit memory is nonverbal.
And by intensive, you mean come in for a half a day, a full day, really spend some quality deep dive time.
That's right.
And have outcomes.
And have outcomes. That's what it's all about. So I wanted to share a little bit, though, Krista, if it's okay with you, about the takeaways, the very specific kind of actionable items.
I think that's important because this feels like it's not in my own control or in my, I can't grasp this. And what can I do to make those changes that I need to thrive, whether it's business or life or love in the future. And this is actually a new tool or a new
It is new
method.
Well, there are lots of new methods.
Yeah. And so I'd like for our audience to leave today with, well, what can I do about this? Or what resources are available without it having to, call a therapist.
That's right. So I think the first step is understanding, and you've just gained that here, that there is this thing called implicit memory. It lives in all of us, and it controls the way we feel and behave. I think the second step then is starting to make things that are invisible visible, which you can do by following the PACT methodology, which again is outlined in the book. But there are things every moment that can change the way your body is reacting. And so I did want to share another resource. It's called the Resilient Brain Project, www.resilientbrainproject.com. And on it, there are a whole bunch of actions for now, things that will actually change your body's physiology now if you employ them. And so there are step-by-step types of things. No money exchanged, no therapist needed, all about empowering.
So is it like a prompting discovery questionnaire, or what exactly?
No, it's I call it a repository of data. So there are apps that are connected into it.
Okay.
There are some written guides and you can search by topic so that you can identify something that resonates with you. So it's just a whole bunch of different resources that are designed to help you shift what's happening in your body right now.
I want to share something that just came to mind, and I don't know whether this is relevant or not.
But I'm sure it does.
Something that happens to me when I hear like a loud yell or a loud voice, like my body goes wacky. And I had a boss that was a yeller. And I ended up walking out of corporate America because of how it made me physically feel. So that comes to mind, and I'm thinking, well, maybe I need to take a little deep dive into why does that affect me so much. And I can even hear it, like if I'm in a grocery store and someone's yelling at their kid, or just that harshness. I don't know if it's like a control thing, a power thing, not, yeah.
But that's such a great example, Krista, because you're talking about sensory input.
Mm-hmm.
There's something in the harshness of the tone, and it sounds like it's always punishing.
Yeah.
And
it might not be. It's just how I'm hearing it.
And your body has a reaction to it. And you said that it played a major role in you leaving corporate America in a major way. So think about that. Well, first of all, I'm glad you did, because you created all this amazing stuff for all the rest of us. But it probably held hands with something earlier. I mean, let's be honest. No one likes to be barked at or screamed at. And I think it's perfectly fine to leave a job where if that's happening. But you're saying you had a really big response that felt different than it just happening.
Well, and I've noticed it as a pattern of when I hear that, I'm like, I get.
You just modeled for us a startle response.
Yeah.
So usually when someone's had their system overwhelmed, they'll startle pretty easily because your body's already on high alert for things that could be dangerous.
So I'm going to have to dig deeper into that one.
I promise you there's data in there. Yeah. I don't know if you want to share it here.
Well, we might. The one thing that it does, it affects me today in that sometimes when I hear someone talking, I definitely know that I'm hearing it different than it's intended.
Mm-hmm. If there's a harshness in their tone.
If there's a tone, it's a tone thing.
Yes, what a great, but that's a great example of a sensory input.
Okay.
Because tone, it's not the words, so we're not intellectually processing it. The tone is signaling something
it's how it's
to you.
making me feel, and it's real.
And it's real.
Mm-hmm.
And then you change your behavior based on that input.
Mm-hmm.
We are not robots. We are way more complex than that. But if you start thinking about this in my, systems engineering mind, it's an input causes a reaction, and then you do something based on that data. It's all messaging. And what I'm talking about here is how we have the science to be able to understand that language.
Well, where can people learn more about the science behind all of this? If this sounds like an interesting subject, is it available on the partnership site?
Information about which piece?
Just the brain, body,
absolutely,
the implicit memory, the studies that are starting to come out on this, the kind of work that you all are doing in your partnership, and like results from it, testimonies, so to speak.
So so vivapartnership.com is my business. We do have blogs, information. It's all designed to empower people about how their body works. And then, of course, I have a lot of studies cited in my book, as well as a lot of web links. This book is designed to empower people. So it really is like, how can you be your best advocate? How can you become aware so that you take control over the results you want in your life, any area?
And there was a piece of the book that was very helpful for me in understanding your why, so to speak. And that is at the end of many of the chapters, there was a section called Why This Matters. Yeah. Why don't you explain a little bit why you added that to the book?
Yeah, so I myself have a trauma history, and I was adopted when I was 2.5 months old. So my first 2.5 months were spent in an orphanage. And I am positive that my therapeutic journey in young adulthood was positively impacted to the nth degree by being introduced to some of these advanced brain-based therapeutics. They saved my life. There were physical symptoms that dissipated when I got certain types of treatment in this way, and it fuels my passion for bringing it to other people so that they can have the same very real physical changes in their system.
And the other thing of what you just said that is so fascinating is this is implicit memory from when you were 2 months old.
Right, I don't remember any of it.
I don't get it. I mean, I have a hard time grasping that.
Let me share this. I had vertigo when I was 30. I went in for one session of this type of work and it went away. And I feel confident based on what came up in that session that it was all about that 2.5 months before I consciously remember anything. But the disorientation, and if you don't already know, vertigo can be life-changing. Some people have symptoms ongoing for years. I haven't had a single symptom since that one session. And you know what? I make meaning of it by saying, hey, it was during my time in the orphanage. I don't really care what it's from. What I care about is the results.
Yeah.
And that it's not crippling me now.
Yeah. And I love some of the testimonies in the back of the book too, and the stories that you tell of real life people and things that have made a significant difference, not just in their life, because obviously it's going to have an impact on their life, but in their business, and especially in a leadership role or owning a company or entrepreneurs.
Yeah, and I'll tell you the other thing that I really geek out on. One of those CEOs actually had some struggle with anxiety. That's what she came in for. And within 3 months, her psoriasis went away. We met all of her goals, and this inflammatory skin condition went away. That is cool. Talk about mind and body. That is very cool. Super cool.
So we're going to show you some contact information, if that's okay, to stay in touch with Dr. Julie. And we're going to put up a slide here. What is the best way to get a hold of you or find you, connect with you?
Yeah, my website, which is drjulielopez.com. You can write in there if you want to understand more about this or be connected to other resources in your area. That's to connect with me. I would also say in the back of my book, there's this 4.5-page resource where you can find out all kinds of different information about the science behind what I'm talking about, as well as on the Resilient Brain Project.
Yeah.
Because there's a whole section called Master the Science. So it explains the science behind everything. If you want to understand the why, there are a lot of resources there.
And one thing that I've gained from this conversation and reading the book is that we're all messed up in some way, right? This isn't just for certain people, right? We all have this implicit memory that has impacted us in some way. And we can tap into that and really be able to take those actions and get through those roadblocks that might have been holding us back before. So that's what we're going to leave you with today. Some great insights that we shared, and we do hope that you thrive in business, love, and life in 2020. And we've got the secret to doing that. So thanks for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you soon, and have a great holiday. Thank you.